Okay, so I'm going to follow up from what Jan was speaking about. My name is Matt Ross. I run the Owens Urban Ag program and also teach in landscape turfgrass management if you want to know more about the program. Greg here is one of my soon-to-be graduating students, and then Meg is currently in the program. So if you guys are interested, there's two representatives that are also here on behalf of Owens. I also have some flyers and handouts. As I mentioned earlier, I have our Urban Ag flyer that's available. If you want to take as many copies as you want, go for it. We just want to spread the word that there is a educational resource for those that are interested in urban agriculture and small farm enterprises. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about going wild, both in your landscape and in your kitchen. So kind of following up what Jan talked about with using natives, some of it's going to be a little bit of a repeat. So I'll kind of zip through some of those slides, but wanted to take it from, okay, we just learned a little bit about native plants. How can I incorporate those into my own growing and in my landscape and then into my kitchen? So we're going to talk a couple things we're going to talk about. I'll probably do a little bit more shameless promotion work. That's one of the things that I was just at a conference about a week ago, and they're like, you need to promote yourself more often, your program. So I always do it anyway, but glad to always have interested individuals listening. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself so you know where I'm from, and a little bit about our partnership at the Oneida Center, challenges facing urban agriculture, and then how do natives fit into the realm of agriculture is the bulk of my presentation. Okay, so there are three major events coming up. One is I'll actually help you design your own vegetable garden. You can contact Rhonda over at Workforce Community Services through Owens. I have a two-part lecture and design session. So the first one's just a lecture, and the second one's a design session, where you actually bring in the layout of your landscape and layout that you want, and we go through and we lay out, this is exactly where your plant should be, this is how much mulch you're going to need, this is how much compost you're going to need, and do a full design session. We also have a huge plant sale coming up. It's our biggest fundraiser. It pays for us to go on fun trips, like going to Planet. So we had a great time just recently going to Auburn, Alabama. It also helps us pay to go to OFA, or the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. And we're still going to talk later. I got to get you some money, Greg. So we went down to Granville, Ohio for the OFA conference, and we went to Auburn, Alabama for our national competition. Next year, that's in Colorado. It cost about $16,000 to $17,000 to take our students to Colorado for this event. This is our primary fundraiser. So if you want to see how you can help our organization without spending too much money and getting something in return, we have a collection of rare and exotic and native trees, shrubs, vines, and really unusual things at our plant sale, plus a lot of annuals. And we do sell a small selection of natives, but we encourage you guys to go to your local nursery, like to go to Jan, to support her natives business. And also I have a plant escape weekend in Catawba Island, May 3rd, 4th, 5th, if anybody's interested in that. Okay? So a little bit about me. I'm originally from the great state of Michigan. I got my bachelor and master's at Michigan State University. I'm a trained landscape designer. That's what I did in the trade primarily before coming to Toledo. And then I was also an educator at Michigan State, now an educator at Owens Community College. When I was at Michigan State, I was a graduate research and teaching assistant for quite a while and taught plant materials courses. Now I get to have the fun part of, going beyond that experience and putting it into practice. And we have about a 4-acre parcel that we're converting into a organic or biorational farming system down in the heart of Toledo. So it's a lot of fun. Very similar to what you guys are doing out here. And we hope that more people are doing the things that Pastor Julian and Brian are doing throughout the city, but also throughout the nation, and hope that we can spark some of that going on. In terms of my industry experience, I worked for my uncle for a long time. I was his number 2 guy, landscape designer. I was a foreman for a Hispanic crew. So at the time I was fluent in Spanish. I'd love to be fluent again. So if anybody wants to practice, I'd appreciate the courtesy of putting up with my half-broken Spanish. I also worked as a Christmas tree salesman, a vegetable producer, and a re-wholesaler of produce. Then teaching, I've taught all kinds of different courses, both at Owens and Michigan State. Michigan State, I was primarily an assistant, so I was teaching underneath a taxonomist. So I love botany and love plants, and hope to spread that passion to all of you as well. So what are the objectives and scope of what we're doing at Owens? We're trying to increase availability of locally produced food to the underserved populace. We want to understand the dynamics of agriculture. The whole production system, not just looking at how do I do one crop really well, how do I do a crop and possibly other crops really well and diversify and its effect on the ecosystem. We promote the professionalism within urban agriculture movement and enhance the horticultural education experience for all residents. And we love when we have trailblazers like Greg in the back that want to start their own business, that want to start their own enterprise, because it's one of the last things we got left in our country is to start farming again. Okay. What are some of the challenges, especially in the urban environment? One of them, the biggest challenge is urban soils. So if you have unproductive soils, you have unproductive land, you have unproductive success, right, or failure. If your soils are terrible, what do? You got to improve them. And you can do that by adding organic matter. You can do that by adding compost. And one way to have a friend in that is by planting native plants that will actually infuse your soil with more organic matter. So using deep-rooted natives that will actually have their annual roots die and become organic matter is one way to get it further down in the profile. They also attract a lot of your soil biota. I teach soil science, and I like to think of it more as soils as being a system, a living system, not just, oh man, that's just dirt. If you say dirt in my classroom, it's a 4-letter word to me. So I'd prefer to hear soil. It is living. It's an awesome entity, and it's something that we don't know a whole lot about. We like to think we do, but with recent research, we were finding out we just know the tip of the iceberg. We also have issues with lack of stability in the labor force. It's tough to get people, especially those that are conditioned to be on a system, to remove themselves from that system, go off that system, and create their own food or work for a livable wage. It's tough to find that. When you find that, that's fantastic, and that we really want to try to reward those people. So if you see or know people that are in that side of the industry, please support them and support all your local farmers. That's pretty much a dying breed in America. If you look at it, your average age of a farmer nowadays is 58 years old. They're going to be retiring. They're going to be trying to pass their farms down, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to have that happen, especially with less and less people interested in large-scale farming operations. We're also seeing kind of a converse thing where we're having a lot of people that are getting involved in small-scale operations, and that's what we want to encourage. You know, you want to have people become farmers again. It's a beautiful life. It's awesome. It's a holistic thing. It's definitely spiritual and religious to be out raising crops, and I don't call it just growing plants. You're raising crops. It's a process. There's a lot of challenges of the current food system. We don't always have the infrastructure that we have in place for large-scale agricultural production, and when you're looking at restaurants and people that buy food, a lot of times they're buying from Sysco and a lot of your other large distributors just because they don't have the availability, the size, the scope of what the urban market has to offer or what the small-scale market has to offer. And that's a big fundamental change that we need to go under in our country, is to start buying locally, buying fresh. And a lot of people are already doing that. It's a growing movement. It just needs to be supported. We also have limited insect populations. This is one of the major areas where natives come into play. If you plant native plants, the goal is to bring in not just those plants and have it be a static system, is to bring in all the benefits that they allow, bring in the wildlife, bring in insects, bring in different soil microorganisms. There's amazing things going on when you bring in native plants, and it's a great way to try to bring some of those beneficial insects to your garden. So we talked a lot about, Jan was talking about all these caterpillars and bugs, and they're going to increase the bugs in your yard. That might scare some people. I've worked in ornamental horticulture for a long time, and I worked with clients that the minute they saw a caterpillar, they were out with a backpack sprayer that night. So it's kind of a fundamental change amongst landscaping as well. If you see a caterpillar, try to find out what it is. There are good and there are also bad. I mean, I've worked with imported cabbage worms. I've worked with all kinds of nasty bugs too, and it's just knowing which ones are good and which ones are bad. Okay? This is one of my favorite pictures. I spent forever, other side. Spent forever, it's a little dark right now, but I spent forever trying to get the perfect shot of blue lupin. It's one of my favorite plants. It's also the signature plant for wild ones, which I'm also a board member of, and the signature plant of the Oak Openings region. It's the primary plant for Karner blues, and is an awesome plant. Is it edible? No. Wouldn't recommend it unless if you're a Karner blue, unless if you really want to go to the hospital. But it is part of a overall ecosystem, and it's an awesome plant. This plant is a prime example of knowing your soils, knowing what's going on in your garden. If you have heavy clay soils, forget about it. You need to have sandier soils. You need to have organic matter in there. If you don't have, for blue lupin. Yep. And if I have heavy clay soils that are waterlogged, it's not going to be a great plant for me. It also has a symbiotic relationship with a lot of the soil microbiota, and that's a good thing to have in your garden because if it's there, it's probably going to spread to other places. And if you have this growing soil microorganisms and then their populations go up, it's never going to be a bad thing for you. They help take care of some of the bad ones. They create habitat for predators and beneficial insects. You can also use native plants to filter out stormwater. And a lot of people think, oh, I'm in a vegetable garden. Why would I have to care about water? And they have a 1 or 2 acre farm. They don't realize sometimes you have unwanted water. And what do you do with unwanted water, especially if you live in the black swamp? If you live in the area that's a black swamp and you don't have agricultural tiled soils, you're going to find out real quick in the spring you can pond up very, very quickly. It's going to increase your soil and site biodiversity as well. So we talked a lot about those solitary bees, those native bees. If you Google Ohio's native bee identification guide, this is what pulls up. So this was done by Mary Gardner at OSU Extension. And you can see it shows you the bee, what it looks like, what its habitat is, where you'd normally find it, and how to ID it. It's a 2-page. It's like a really cool laminated. You can purchase them as well, but it's really cool. I print this off and then laminate it. So that way I've got my native bees right on a little thing I'll bring out to the garden. I'm not an entomologist by any stretch of the imagination. I'd love to get more involved with bugs, but this is a great way to kind of tell you, is this a native bee? Is this a not native bee? And then is it a bee or is it something that looks like a bee? So your wasp, how do you tell the difference between a wasp and a bee? How do you tell the difference between a syrphid fly and a bee? And what are the benefits and risks of having both of them in your garden? It was really interesting when Jan said that nobody's had an anaphylactic shock from a native bee. That was really cool to hear. Probably. I've had my fair share of stings. I'm not going to lie to you. I've stepped in a hornet's nest. I've put my hand in a hornet's nest. I've been stung by any and every wasp you could ever imagine. I was the kid that came home from camping that's like whole arm was 3 times larger, had stingers all down my face, and I've had my fair share running with the vespid world. Okay, and here's one of those plants. This is a plant that I actually brought with me. I always like to bring plants with me because I don't like to travel alone. But this is Silphium perfiladium. This is cut plant, and it's an awesome, awesome plant. If you want to bring in native beneficials, this is a great one for you. It takes about 2 years to get up to its size. This little guy right here is going to end up being about 7 to 9 feet tall. Okay, huge plant. Now, do I want to put that in the middle of my vegetable garden? Probably not. Is it edible? Not to me. But it brings in things that increase my pollination, that increase my beneficial predators or beneficial bugs that are going to go out and eat the bad guys. Okay? So this little guy eventually is going to get about 7 to 9 feet tall, and it creates a cup. That's how it got its name. It fills with water. And if you guys have young kids, I see a lot of you that have young kids in the audience, one of the coolest things for those kids is to like look at the plant and it catches the water and to like pull the leaves down and you see like there's a bug and oh my God, there's like all these bugs and there's algae and all this other stuff growing inside of this little cup. It's kind of a cool little mini ecosystem. Okay? So not all natives are actually built for the manicured landscape either. Some of them don't like being in manicured situations with mulch, with high intensity fertilizing, with use of pre-emergent herbicides. You can kill a lot of your natives just by putting down preen, because if they're self-seeding annuals, they're not coming back for you. And some of them are better left out in the peripheral areas, so not in your growing spaces. A lot of times ditches are really good spots for plants like cut plant, for Joe Pye weed, for sumac, elderberry, twig rushes, things that, okay, they're pretty cool plants, they're awesome. Do I want them in my manicured landscape? Maybe the sumac, if I've got the right spot. Maybe the twig rush, if I'm a little adventurous. But Joe Pye weed, cut plant, a lot of those do really well in ditch areas. They'll do wet soils. The cut plant prefers like a wet, sandy soil. Joe Pye weed will grow just about anywhere. I love the plant. It's kind of a cool pink flower too. There are 2 of those on that list that are edible, elderberry and sumac. So elderberry I use in the landscape trade before I got involved with wild ones and a lot of the other native plant groups that I work with. I've used Sambucus nigra, which is the black lace, which actually has very little benefit to our insects and very little benefit to you because you don't get to eat it. It berries, but it berries very small and they're not great. If you're going for maximum berry, you're looking at the blue elderberry, which is also not native, which is towards the west coast, or Sambucus canadensis, which is our native. Awesome plant. It provides habitat for solitary bees. They like to put their little stinger in and leave a bee egg inside of your elderberry canes. So if you're making a bee hotel or a bee house for a friend, great stocks for it. It also has a very beautiful habit to it. It's a nice draping, weeping habit, but it'll do really well in ditch situations. Loves wet feet, handles the water well, and you get an edible plant. With this one, you need to boil the fruit before you eat it just to make it taste good. It tastes horrible without sugar and without being processed into juice. It's really, really bitter. Has anybody ever had elderberry before? Right now they're selling it in cough syrup bottles about this big for about $18 for the concentrate. Not cheap. They're also doing elderflower infused water, and actually elderberry infused spirits as well, where they're taking the flowers and getting some of the essence and some of that nectar that Jan was talking about and putting it into a sparkling drink. So kind of a cool plant. Sumacs, you can actually make sumac 8. If you go to Jan's nursery in the summer, she'll make it for you every once in a while. It's just like lemonade, a little bit fruitier, a little bit more fragrant, but I kind of like it. It's pretty good. But you do have to watch out and make sure that you're using the red flowers, not white flowers. If you have white flowering sumac, you have poison sumac. Wouldn't recommend making any tonics or beverages out of poison sumac anytime soon. Okay? So and a little caveat, before you start eating natives, make sure you know what you're eating, because you can go on the other side of the spectrum real quick. And it might be something that just gives you an upset stomach once and you never do it again. Or it might be something that could be a little bit more serious. If you were drinking poison sumac aid, it'd probably be on the spectrum of a little bit more serious. Okay? But people don't always think about what they could have that's native in their landscape that they could eat. Sugar maple's a great one. Okay? Now, is everybody here in the audience going to be able to get a sugar bush and have 50 gallons of sap to turn into 1 gallon of syrup? Probably not. Maybe you guys form a little collaborative and you're like, hey, I got some sugar maples on my property in the back 40, and I got some sugar maples in my back 40, and I can get 25 gallons if you can get 25 gallons, and together we can make 50 gallons to get 1 gallon of syrup. Seems like a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but I love doing it. I miss the times when I was up in Michigan. I had a really good friend whose parents owned their own maple syrup production facility, and it was awesome. It was like the coolest thing in the world. Also doubles really well as a paintball arena if you're in the paintball world. But sugar maples are quite large. They prefer a loamy forest soil, so they're not going to do well in urban soils. But if you have a little bit more of a larger parcel, 2, 4, 5 acres, you could put a couple in. And it might be a while before you get to turn around on your investment. Sugar maples take a while to really mature to the point where you're going to get a whole lot of syrup. Serviceberry, on the other hand, will grow just about anywhere. Serviceberry, has anybody ever grown serviceberry or had it before? Awesome plant, does really well. It flowers in a couple weeks, so you'll start seeing white flowers along the roadside. If they're on like a long spike, it's probably serviceberry. Good flavored berry. You do have a lot of seeds though, so it's like a blueberry but with a lot of seeds. So if you strain it and you make serviceberry syrup, or if you make serviceberry beverages, I'm trying to get people to quit the pop industry and go into adding sparkling water and berries, and that's a good one to do. Then there's American hazelnut. If you've never had Nutella before, Nutella is the English variety of our American hazelnut. But they grow really well in an understory planting, not too big. They get about 10 to 12 tall and about 12 to 15 wide, right around there. And they will provide nuts for you. You're not going to get a huge plethora. I'm just letting you know, if you use the native species and not a cultivated variety, you're going to get a couple nuts every year. Okay? The deer are probably going to eat more of them than you're going to eat. And if you have a lot of deer in the property, this is a go-to plant for them. So if you want them to go somewhere else, give them a reason to go somewhere else, right? And this is one plant that gives them a reason to go somewhere else. American beech, a lot of people don't realize, but you can actually eat beech nuts. How many people have ever eaten a beech nut before? They get these fuzzy, like capsulated fruiting pods on them. I have a home in northern Michigan. We get loads of them. And they're a unique flavor. They're kind of nutty. They're not as sweet as a chestnut. They're kind of more on the bitter side. But you do want to heat those up before you eat them as well. Eastern redbud. How many people already have a redbud in their landscape? I was hoping somebody did. Okay? But redbuds are a real popular tree. They have a purple flower that comes out. It goes all the way down the stalk of the plant. You can actually eat the flowers. You can dust them in sugar, throw them in a salad. You can use them as a garnish. You can wash them. I like to throw them in a nice, cool water, kind of blanch them a little bit and then throw them in cold water, or just throw them in cold water before serving them. If I just leave them dry, they're not as attractive. They don't look as nice. And when you dust them in sugar, I'm addicted to sugar, okay? I'm going to be completely honest. I love it. I think it's amazing. It makes everything in the world taste a little bit better. And I think some people would have better days if they just had a little pinch of sugar. But if you add that to a native plant, I feel a little bit less guilty about it. So I might make a citrus salad, add a little bit of sugar to balance the flavors, and throw some of the redbud flowers in there. And they're beautiful. You really want to impress somebody? That's one way to impress somebody. Then there's oaks. Be careful because they're poisonous unless if you boil them or heat treat your acorns. And oaks, actually, the main reason I have them on here is they're a native hub for insects. They're the #1 tree for supplying your garden with native beneficial insects. Okay, and there's another one that really strikes deep into my heart. Brian knows this really well because he brought me some last year. If you want to make my day, hook me up with a pawpaw. So pawpaw is an understory tree, likes filtered sun, and it normally likes really rich soil. So if you have heavy clay soils, once again, I'm sorry, we'll tell you what you can grow. Pawpaw is not one of them. How many people have ever eaten our native pawpaw before? Other than Greg in class, what'd you think? It's a banana custard flavor, awesome flavor, just dynamite. You cannot find them in this grocery store. So one of the benefits of growing your own food is you get to pick what you get to eat. Takes a while for them to produce, about 7 years from the time you start off with a whip. So it's a longer-term investment. We do have some that are native in our area. At Wildwood, you'll see them as you go across the wooden-covered path. Probably shouldn't have told everybody because I know you guys are all going to go out there and harvest them. Sometimes they're better left for the animals and one particular professor that likes to go out and eat them. But you do get a pretty awesome flavor out of it. If you want to experience pawpaws, Southern Ohio, in Athens, there's a young gentleman who made it the state fruit tree of Ohio. So this just about 2 years ago, it's now declared. They actually had an official decree that it's the state fruit tree of Ohio. So why not, if you're into Ohio, why not have one on property? Okay. And the flower on it is the one that you see right there, that maroon-colored flower. You got to get really close to see them, but they are pretty beautiful. But awesome plant. Fun one for kids, too, because if you peel the pawpaw back, it's kind of slimy on the outside. I know that sounds really appetizing. But for a kid, it's like the coolest thing in the world. Like, you're pulling this out, and there's huge seeds, so you don't have to worry about them swallowing a bunch of small seeds. But if you have real small kids, you got to worry about them getting stuck in their airway. But for kids, to see that huge bean is like the coolest thing in the world. You're telling me this thing turns into a tree? That's so cool. Okay. Shrubs. This is a picture right near where my sister lives in western Michigan. They're the blueberry capital of the world. We do actually have some native blueberries that you can use. I was just at Wildwood, right along the blue trail and along the red trail. There are, or the blue trail and the trail going out back towards the main manor house. There are native low bush blueberries that we have here. They like sandier soils, so think of Wildwood, sandier acidic soil, a little bit more developed. They'll do well there. So if you're out in Wauseon, Swanton, or if you're in an area where you're blessed to have a little bit of loamier sand and richer, a little bit more on the acidic side because they do like acid, then this would be a native plant that you could use that's also edible. And if you've never had low bush blueberries, these are the big boys. These are high bush. Low bush is way sweeter, especially when you get it the day that it's ripe. It's awesome. There's elderberry, there's New Jersey tea, sumac, and spice bush. And I just found out there's a grower down in southern Ohio that actually sells dehydrated spice bush berries. and it was one of their hottest ticket items last year. So those of you that are into spice bush, it's awesome because it's a host plant for black swallowtails. So if you're into butterflies, in addition to the monarch, we also have some other really beautiful butterflies in our area, and it's a host for swallowtails, and it's also got a very, very odoriferous and awesome, sweet-smelling bark to it. You can scratch it with your thumb. If you want one, you can buy one from Jan. They're normally about this big when you start, but they'll eventually get to be about 10 to 12 feet tall, about 8 to 10 wide. So a pretty large shrub eventually. If you're trying to manage it and keep its height down, there are ways to do that as well. Here are some of my favorites. This is mountain mint and bergamot. Bergamot is actually used as a supplement for Earl Grey, which I just found out the other day, which all rhymes, which is kind of cool. But bergamot, you can make teas out of it. It's a big one for bringing in bees and other pollinators into your garden. And if you have this in the manicured landscape, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of advice. After it blooms, after it's going to set seed and you start to see the petals all fade, if you don't want it to get mildew, because a big problem is that this plant gets mildew in the landscape, cut it back. It'll reflush, and you might even get a second bloom out of it. So bergamot's a fun one. Mountain mint, I actually brought some of that, and I'm going to pass that around while I'm still speaking. And I know I'm going pretty quick. I'll make sure that I get the information to Brian so you guys can have this available at your fingertips. I'm going to pass this around. This is mountain mint. So mountain mint's edible. You can actually eat the leaves off of it. But one of the other benefits of having this in the garden is if you make your own potpourri, if you make your own sachets for Christmas, it holds its fragrance. If you smell that right now, you're going to smell like mint for about the next 20 to 30 minutes. So that's a great benefit of having the plant. So when I look at having some of these things in my vegetable garden, mountain mint, bergamot, dotted horse mint, all three of those can spread. And the one that's going to spread the most will be bergamot because it's a true mint. It's going to go. With all three of those, I kind of set aside an area to have them into my plantings. So I do a lot of native plantings that are also edible that I mix in with my vegetable garden. These are some of the ones that I put in an area where if they spread out a little bit, I'll be able to be a little bit more intense in their management to keep them from spreading too far. Dotted horse mint is my favorite native plant. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. It was actually extinct from the oak openings region and then resurfaced not too long ago. Gorgeous plant, does really well in sandy soils. Then bergamot, teas. Teas, and actually I found out they actually put it in hair care products. They'll use bergamot. Mountain mint you can use as a tea. You can use the leaves for tea as well. And then I found online, I've never done this, but you can actually eat the young tender leaves of it. I've chewed on them, but I've never really incorporated them into anything. But I saw a recipe for a banana bread with like a minty banana bread style baked good that I thought would be a good idea. Other things that I can eat that are native, fiddlehead ferns. If I have a shady part of my garden, everybody says, man, I have shade and I can't grow anything to eat. You can grow ferns, and you can actually eat the fiddleheads. Has anybody ever eaten a fiddlehead before? What do you guys think? Yep. Okay, yeah, out east, it's a big deal. Fiddlehead ferns are a huge deal out east, as are ramps, the one that are right above here in our onion section. So you can grow nodding onion. That's a big one of mine. That's I make chili, and I'll replace red onion with nodding onion. It's a native plant. It brings in pollinators, and you can eat the actual bulb off of it. Word to the wise, if I'm growing nodding onion, the first year I might get a decent-sized bulb. If it's bulbed up and I replant it, so I've got one right here to show you. If I let this sit in the ground, one of the problems I have is it's an awesome plant, but I need to figure out what my intent is. If my intent is to eat this plant, then I got to catch it before those bulbs have another season in the ground. Because what a bulb is essentially storing up energy, right? So if it's storing up all this energy, in the first year it stored up all this energy and I didn't eat it, the next year it's going to use that energy to proliferate, make its seed, and use the energy it stored up here to spread itself. So if I'm doing nodding onion for the purpose of eating onions, I'm going to save some of them in the ground so that they produce seed, so I have stock for next year. I'll seed it out and eat it at the end of the year. Does that make sense? So I'll pull them at the end of the year, and I won't pull all of them. It's kind of fun because they grow in pairs. They kind of split like this in the ground. So when I see nodding onion in its early stages, it's normally split. It's divergent in a V. What I tell people to do is break one off for yourself, leave one for the wild. Okay?
Do other kinds of onions do that too?
Yeah, so yeah, if I was to take, so onion sets, the tiny little guys, they're set to become a big onion. But if I was to take a big onion and plant it out, to get it to sprout and plant it out, it would use all the energy inside of that bulb to turn into a bunch of leaves and hopefully flower. That's why they're an annual crop.
But they don't come up again following year?
Which ones? Nodding onion will. Nodding onion's hardy.
Yeah, but otherwise.
Some of your evergreen onions will pop up if you're further south than we're at here. And you might also have Egyptian walking garlic, which is a type of onion as well. Okay, but then the native ones that I'm going to talk about are nodding onion, and wild leeks or ramps. So I am an onionaholic. In addition to loving sugar, I love garlic, I love onions, right? I'm like, you can fix just about anything with either sugar, which I hate to say because, I've got diabetes in my family, the whole deal, or you can fix it the other realm with enough garlic and onion to just make it taste good, okay? And what's better than actually growing your own? And growing your own that's native so you know that you're helping out some of the native bees, bugs, and ecosystem, okay? So I have ramps here too. And I also have nodding onion. So I've got nodding onion. This is what it looks like. Its first year in production from seed. It's kind of a pretty plant, but when it flowers is when it's really at its showiest. And that is the picture of the pink flower that you see right there. Okay? If I start nodding onion from seed, it normally takes me 2 years to get them to bloom. When they bloom, they're gorgeous. They're absolutely beautiful, and that's how they should be appreciated in nature. So if I'm in nature, I let this go to seed, and I let it stay there in nature. And I don't dig up nodding onion because there's other plants that will replace it relatively quickly that are not as good for the ecosystem. But if I want to grow it for myself, I find a good source for it, local source for it, then I start becoming my own seed nursery. So I produce some of it, then I let some of it go to seed. Make sense? Okay. Yeah.
On the seed pods, it's just like a regular onion.
Yep.
You just sprinkle that out as you get more, just divide them out.
Yep, that, or you can actually hold them off in your fridge, and then in the spring plant them out and direct sow them that way. Or you can start them ahead earlier. They take about 12, it takes a long time to get them to really, if you start them and you want them to bulb up this year, you want to start them anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks before you set them out in the garden. So that might mean you hand spread them, or it might mean you seed them early. They have a benefit too that your yellow and red onions don't have. They're native, so they like this climate. So a lot of times people will make the mistake of having southern onion stock, which likes the south and hates the north. And they're like, I'm not going to bulb up for you. I'm just going to be this pesky, nasty thing that's taking up space. This won't do that for you. It likes our climate. And you know you're going to get a solid crop. The other downside of it is if I compare this to a red onion in a recipe, I need quite a bit of this to take over my red onion. Now, I can also eat the leaves off of this like a green onion as well. But we do have another native onion, which is thought of more of as a weed in your lawn than anything else. This is our native wild onion. Our wild onions and wild garlics normally look like weeds in our lawn. They normally pop up ahead of time. They're green now. Okay, so that's one of the ways that you can find out that they're the native variety. If I go to eat them, I break it first, smell it. If it doesn't smell like an onion, you might not have a wild onion. You might have twig rush or something else that looks like it. So it should smell like an onion. If it doesn't look like an onion, smell like an onion, it's probably not an onion, okay? But these will not bulb up. These do not get big bulbs on them. You use these like green onion. And if you've ever camped and done Boy Scouts, a lot of times they teach you to chop them up, throw them into your dish, kind of like chives.
And how do they proliferate?
By seed. By seed. And they're very prolific. These will have a white flower, while nodding onion will have a pink flower. And then leeks you don't normally see with the grass-like foliage. They're normally flatter, wider foliage. So these were just harvested last week out of the wild. I should be able to show you. This is a wild leek on the right, and this is a native wild onion on the left. Or actually, it'd be the other way around for you guys, right? Got the mirror effect going on. Okay, how many people have ever had ramps before? Ramps, wild garlic. It's a shame Greg had to leave because he could tell you how they taste raw. They are strong. They're a very strong flavor, and you can't really find them in the grocery store. They only last about 2 to 3 weeks in storage. And if you've ever been to the eastern woods, there's a lot of ramp festivals. You hear about people like the ramping up of spring or the ramp festivals. That's one of the plants they're talking about. Also, if you watch shows like Iron Chef or any of the Chopped series on the Food Network, they always talk about wild ramps because it's a tricky flavor to get right. But when you get it right, there's nothing better in the world than fresh ramps. And that world-class chefs from all around the world want these plants. Okay? I urge you that if you do collect these out of the wild, not to disrupt the entire stand. It takes a while for these things to build up a seed population. And if you go into an area and you find ramps, you're probably going to find a lot of them in a close area. Take a couple if you're in an area where you're allowed to harvest, but leave some. Don't just take everything. That's a big no-no in the foraging side of things. You can also grow these yourselves in your peripheral areas. Underneath trees, if you have a woodland area, you can grow them there. If you want to grow them in your vegetable garden because you're that addicted to the flavor, like myself, you need to put up shade cloth above them. And you can do them in a raised garden, but you want your really good organic soils. They're all right being a little bit alkaline, so they don't need it too acidic. But they'll do well being alkaline as well. So you might see them. You might even have to add a little bit of lime in there to counteract the compost. Awesome plant, though. If you can get these and get them into a productive stand, they're worth their weight in gold. When do you know when they're ripe? They're going to tell you. Their leaves will be fully expanded. They'll be shiny. As soon as that shininess is present, you can pull them out. Normally around this size right here. So, yep, and if you let them go past that and they start getting dull or they're really, really, really shiny, if they go in either direction, you're done. Because what's going to happen is they're going to take the energy out of the stem. Okay, if they go to seed, you're done. You definitely don't, at that point, not worth it. Let them go to seed and save the seed. For us in our area, it's around anywhere from the end of April to the middle part of May. And it's a feel. You just kind of get a feel for some of these plants when they're ready. Okay? Nodding onion you can eat year-round, pretty much, because you can eat it as a green onion. Okay? So when I'm designing with my edible natives, one of the things I might do is I might have a permaculture situation or permanent agriculture where I have plants that come back year after year after year after year. So when I talked about like the nodding onion, if I get a good stand of nodding onion, that's a lot more productive than having to go out and seed out every year a green onion. And I've got it in an area that it's producing well, that I get a good harvest out of, I can normally get enough to spread out and share with my friends. Okay? Also, the benefit here is I'm not constantly rotating my soil. I'm not constantly disturbing the ecosystem. I'm allowing it to stay in one place. Okay? And the idea is that I do it in layers. So I start with my top layers, and I look at what's going to be my canopy, what's going to be the next layer down, what's going to be the next layer down. And I can actually produce a lot of material that's edible in a smaller space if I kind of layer it. I can also infuse some of these into my regular agricultural settings or my regular vegetable garden. So I have no problem telling people, hey, early spring, you want to have some beautiful leafy greens out there and you want it to mix in with your landscape, even if it's around your house from 50 miles an hour when someone's driving in front of your house. Swiss chard looks like more of an ornamental than it is an edible. Blue kale looks more like an ornamental than it does an edible. Mix them into your bulb displays. Mix them into your regular landscape displays. Do potted containers. If you have a really pretty container and it's got some attractive foliage in it, it doesn't matter what type of foliage it is. And if it's something you can eat, that's even better, right? I can also mix in some of these for the benefits of pest control. Onions. next to brassicas, like your cauliflowers, your kales, your broccolis, actually serve a purpose because they act, if I create a 3-tier system with dill on one side, brassica in the middle, onion on the other side, I get the benefits of all three. I get the benefits of the fact that some bugs don't like dill. Some bugs don't like onions. Both of those bugs really like broccoli. So if I want to keep them off my broccoli, I can have them either go to the onion and be like, oh, that's not for me. Go to the dill. Oh, that's not for me. Or I can kind of reduce the amount of pesticides that I use without even having to put down a cover. If I want to, I can also use a cover. And I can cover my broccoli so I create a physical barrier. Okay, so there's a lot of interaction that can go on. Plus, onions get the benefit of, if I'm not one solid stand of bunching onion or one solid stand of your big, huge onions that you're used to getting, okay, I'm going to reduce the amount of risk that I have for onion maggot, which is one of the only problems that onions get. I mean, they get a couple others, but normally onion maggot's an issue. And if I have a huge stand of it and it's just all onions, it's probably going to get onion maggot. But if I've got them plopped within my vegetable garden and I'm growing a beautiful mix of plants, I'm less likely to get that problem. I also want to make sure I get the right plant in the right place. If I put something that doesn't like the soil conditions in my ground, it's going to tell me by turning its leaves yellow, by dying out in 2 to 3 years. And the solution is go to the soil first, figure out what was going on. If I plant a high bush blueberry that likes really acidic soils, that likes wet, sandy soils, and I plant it into clay, it's not going to work out. It's going to tell me I might live 2 to 3 years, and then it dies. And most people turn around and they're like, well, that stinks. Must have been a bad plant. I'll go with another one because I really wanted blueberries. That first year, I got a really good blueberry harvest. And they'll go and they'll plant a blueberry again without looking at the soil conditions, and they have the same problem happen over and over again. Start by knowing your soil. Start by knowing your sunlight. Okay? And pick the right plant for the right place. You also want it to be visually appealing. So one of the biggest knocks on natives is that they look like weeds. Well, some of them do, right? And one way to combat that is I stage them. So I have spring blooming natives. I have midsummer. I've got late summer. And if I get something blooming all throughout the year, it doesn't matter that New England aster looks like a weed until fall when it looks absolutely gorgeous when it flowers purple. So I have something else in there that I plant with it that looks good. Now I can do the same thing with my vegetable garden. People in the landscape and horticulture will say the ugliest part of someone's yard is probably going to be their late summer vegetable garden, right? You walk out there, you've got a tomato that's only got leaves, from 1.5 feet up. Some of them are yellow, some of them are brown. I've got squash. Squash normally is not the prettiest plant in the world come summertime, right? Leaves normally get major defoliation issues. They might be brown. They might be curled up on the ends. They're not the prettiest thing in the world. To me, I think it's gorgeous. I love a vegetable garden. But to the rest of the world, they might think, that's really kind of nasty and mangled and just not the best look in the world. Well, why not design it so that it's aesthetically pleasing to you or others, but mainly you, because it's about you, especially if it's in your backyard. It's about you. One way I can enhance that is by having things that are going to bloom late. So if that tomato plant's really looking ragged come September or October, and I have a New England aster nearby, that's its time to shine, it kind of counterbalances what's going on. Make sense? Okay. Trying to get it to move forward here. Had a little bit of issue there, Bob, trying to move forward. Oh, there we go. Okay. Then there's a lot of natives that are best left solely in the wild, where it's not worth bringing them into your vegetable garden. It's not worth bringing them into your landscape, unless if you're there to provide wildlife food other than yourself. Great example is mayapple. Mayapple is one that provides food for box turtles. Box turtles are on a major decline. It's a beautiful plant. It's really cool. It's fun to teach kids about the birds and the bees with this plant because it's sexually dimorphic. So you can see the difference between boys and girls, and that the girls have the fruit. Okay? And if you eat that fruit, it's not the best thing in the world. I've eaten them before. People will rave about them. You'll read on blogs, oh, I ate mayapple. It was really good. We're like, oh, you probably got it exactly when it was ripe from a really healthy stand, and you probably like exotic things, and that's more the appeal than the flavor of the plant. Okay? Then there's Spring Beauty. Spring Beauty tastes good. It actually looks like a potato when you harvest it. It's a native tuber. It's one that's best left for wildlife. If you're going to grow it, find someone that's got good seed for it, seed it out and grow it for yourself in your own garden, and develop a stand of it. It's an ephemeral. Flowers in the spring. In fact, that's going to be flowering at the beginning of May. Then it dies off, and you don't see it. It turns into kind of like this succulent-y foliage. It's kind of there, kind of not there. But it'll drape an entire forest floor when you have a healthy population. You're not the only one that wants to eat that. There's other things in the wild that want to eat it. Ramps. If I'm going to be harvesting ramps, I make sure I leave some for the wildlife. Okay? So one of the things I like to encourage people to do is go ahead, grow natives. Notting onion is probably your easiest one to start with for a native edible. Okay? But when I get into things and I start reading blogs, try it out. Mayapple's poisonous until it gets ripe. And the seed's nasty. If you crack into a seed, you will never want to eat it again. You will never want to even look at the plant again because it's really, really bitter. Okay? So, take it with a little grain of salt or add a little bit of sugar, right? But these are plants, both of those plants are kind of left better in the wild. And if I'm going to harvest something like Spring Beauty, make sure I replace it. So if I've got it, make sure that nothing else grows in that spot that I harvested from it. Because if I pull that out of the ground and there's honeysuckle nearby, I've got a fresh new patch of soil for that honeysuckle to grow. Okay? And one way to replace it is to grow it yourself. Get the seed, try it out in your own garden. Okay? Another little plug, we got the vegetable garden design class, we got our plant sale coming up, and the bed and breakfast. And I'm going to talk to you real briefly. I don't know how much time you have, Brian. Go for it, man. Okay. Talk to you real briefly about our program at Owens. These are the courses that we offer. I'll just put them all up there at once so you can kind of see what's going on. Try to give you a well-rounded appreciation of urban agriculture, from animal production to our urban horse sustainability class, which is awesome. That's one of my favorite classes. This is part of that class, talking about native edibles, talking about native plantings as well. We have a urban livestock and animal husbandry course that's going on this fall or this summer. You don't have to be a full-time student. You might already have a degree and you're like, I'm really interested in animals. This would be one way to kind of get an idea of what's going on in the animal realm. We have our harvest and post-harvest class. Greg, who's in the back, made an absolutely phenomenal purple tomatilla sorbet that was infused with vodka and mint. It was awesome. It was a really good flavor. One of the best sorbets I've had in my entire life. He had that as part of his class project. Each student had to make their own project. We had a student that had a canned bruschetta. We had another student that made kimchi and looked at different storage durations and different storage techniques and looked at what worked out the best. A lot of fun stuff. Oh, yeah. And Brian's been in quite a few of them. In fact, he's in most of these pictures. Here we are doing native plant production. We do quite a bit of native plant production in our courses. This was back in the day before we had our Oneida Center. This is at TBG, but we also do it at our greenhouse as well. Here's Brian again. Green roof installations. He was a little camera shy at first, right, Brian? Yeah, didn't like that. But here we are building green roofs. That's another thing we do in our urban horse sustainability class. And if you know the guy in the top of the screen there, that's Brad Fields from Fields of Dreams out on the east side doing a lot of really good work out there. Here's Greg, who was in the audience earlier, and some of my other students building and designing the green roof. We do a lot of soils analysis. So here we are checking for organic matter content. There's Brian in a pretty substantial aquaculture pit before he came to University Church. Got a chance to hang out with him just about every day. Here we are grinding our soil. It's always fun. Here's some of our plots down at the Oneida Center. We cataloged about 800 pounds of produce last year that we gave to charity. We had one market day event, and then a lot of us got really, a little filled on some of our produce. Some of us a little bit more than others. And we had a really fun harvest. One of our other harvests was our peanuts. So it's a shame you had to leave early, but wanted to thank Greg and all my students for their hard work out there. It's always rewarding when you pull up a plant, and if you have little kids, peanuts are probably the coolest thing in the world. You start them from unroasted, unsalted peanuts. They turn into a plant. Hopefully, you'll get some by the end of the season. They're a really long crop. There's a reason Georgia is known for their peanuts, because they have about 8 more weeks of growing season than we do. You need about 8 more weeks of growing season to get a good peanut. Trick of the matter is, get them started inside early. Yes? You can add, what we actually used was Kroger's unsalted, unroasted peanuts. Oh, no. No, I don't know of any source.
When do you recommend starting them inside?
February, it's about the right time. So you could start them now. There's people that do direct sow. If I direct sow or if I put them right into the ground right now, I need to fertilize pretty heavily during the growing season.
At one point you talked about pesticides. Don't you do organic gardening?
Just because it's labeled as a pesticide doesn't mean it's not organic. You have conventional and organic. So there's the Organic Materials Research Institute, OMRI. You'll see that on labels. And if they deem it being organic, it's going to have an OMRI sticker right on it. Yep. So there's things that we use, like we'll use microbial infusions. We'll also use fungal inoculations. And now we're doing more with biologicals where we're actually bringing in the predators from some of our pests and releasing them. But there are other alternatives. For instance, neem oil is considered organic, but it's also considered a pesticide because it kills a pest. We also had eggplant extravaganza. It's kind of a tongue twister there. Our students got a chance to go up to Michigan State. That's a researcher, Rachel Nagel. She was working on the germplasm of eggplants. So we got to see the grandparents of our traditional eggplants throughout the world. So we grew eggplants from Laos, China, Italy, Israel, all over the world. Laos, just really cool. And you get to see right here, we had just a plethora of them. And that's your tax dollars at work. The taxpayers pay for the USDA. The USDA has a germplasm center where they have all these seeds. And we got a chance to grow these plants, save their seeds, and we'll be growing them again this year. Kind of showing the heritage of the crop, which is really cool. And it makes really good moussaka. So if anybody wants a really good recipe, Denise Gehring, who's in one of those photos, is like the best in town. And I got Baba Ganoush from Tony Moore, who's also really, really an amazing chef. So there's a lot of things you can do with eggplants. In fact, I had a student make cookies out of them. And they made eggplant cookies and served them with chocolate, and they were actually pretty good. Again, you put enough sugar on anything, it's going to taste good. Sorry, I feel like I'm like the Anti-Diabetes Association spokesperson right now. Yeah, stevia, and we've used stevia, but stevia leaves an aftertaste. But all of it's better than aspartame, so in my opinion. So this is our community garden on campus. We actually just got an award for this last year. We service our food pantry out of our community garden. We had 200 families that were being served with food. It was all no spray, so we had no spray, so beyond organic. We never touched it with anything, produce. And if you have really good soils, it really limits what you need to do. And if you have an aggressive strategy like, hey, if the broccoli doesn't look good, we're just not going to give them broccoli. So we'll pull it out and put something else in. If you start with easier plants to care for in a community gardening setting, it normally makes you more successful. But we served about 200 families food out of our community garden. So we had blackberries. They had fresh, no-spray blackberries, which are really hard to find. We had onions. We had tomatoes galore, all kinds of fun things, and we gave it out for free. They didn't even have to sign anything other than put their name down and how many people are in their family. Because a lot of times people have a hard time with institutions, and it's like all this paperwork just to get a lemon or just to get, a squash. We had a no paperwork policy pretty much. We used to harvest on Tuesdays. This is one of our harvest baskets. It's not a whole lot of produce. We also have dry goods and also have donations from a lot of other food banks, but we did supplement some of it with our food. It also helps build community when you're out there gardening. We had a gentleman that was out there, and I had all this beautiful sage and all this beautiful lavender. And I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I got to be completely honest. I use sage very limitedly. like, you have all this sage, and if you plant sage, you get a lot of it. I'm like, well, I'm going to harvest it, and I harvest it, and the food pantry's like, it's gone. What are you talking about? It's gone. Like, yeah, we had a student who really, really excited about it. Kid came in, he was helping out on a bio project that he was doing, and they did a field trip out to our community garden. He walks out there, he's like, you're the guy with the sage. What's up? How you doing? I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, you don't understand this. You want to make a brine for fried chicken? I'm telling you right now, I'm taking all that sage. And he gave me the recipe. He's like, this is my great-grandma's recipe from the South. He's like, you just made my day, sir. And he took a whole garbage bag full of sage home with him. So it helps build community and spark conversation. If you're interested, I'd love to have you in my classroom. My classroom's pretty diverse. Brian's taken quite a few of our courses. Meg's there now, so if you want to talk to Meg about our greenhouse class, she's currently making the planters and making the plants that you guys hopefully will come and buy at the April plant sale coming up on April 24th and 25th. But you can also come on out to the plant sale, or I'd love to have you in my class. I do have some plants, so I do have some things to give you guys for coming today. I've got some of the Silphium perfiladium. I've got one wild onion, and mind you, that could become a weed. So you got to be a little careful. That's a plant that could escape. I've got the ramps. I've got seed from the mountain mint, so if you want more seed. And then I've got these cut plants. So feel free, come on up, grab whatever literature that you want, and you can take whatever plants you want. Don't really have a great way to pass them out, but I do have a bucket full of nodding onion. You can either try it, throw it in a dish tonight, or you could plant it out and get it to go to seed and then collect the seed and start the process so that in 2 years you could have a productive nodding onion little part of your garden. Any questions?
Are you available to work with startup urban ag projects?
Like,
Or I know you're working, you have the Oneida.
mm-hmm,
So you're basically, that's your downtown urban ag
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
center hub, right?
That's where I'm out of, yep.
And so that's where you're doing all the stuff you're doing here, is that there and also at the Owens campus?
Correct. Yep, it's split half and half, but urban ag is almost exclusively taught at Oneida. Yep.
Come down and see, I work about 2 blocks from there.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Yeah, we'd love to have you come down there. It's changed a lot in the last year.
Has it? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, well, I was actually thinking about Heaven's Garden, which is the startup at the Ashland Manor. And
Okay.
thinking about, they could probably use a little bit of assistance and guidance, maybe.
Okay.
They're thinking about starting planting, I guess, in a couple of weeks.
Planting their garden. They could come to the vegetable garden session. And that's at Arrowhead Park. That's not down at Oneida. So I can put that information back up here. They just need to call Rhonda, and it's a 2-day class. So the first one, it's 6 to 8:30 at night. The first one is a lecture, and then I give them homework. So they have to go home and take a little bit of soils, because we actually test their soils in class for organic matter content. And then we actually do the design. So you get the full design.
All right, sounds good. My wife's actually thinking about taking a couple of your classes.
Oh, good, good. Yeah. Hey, honey, what are you doing? Other questions? Okay, I was asked if chard can grow in the shade, and it's one of your better plants in lower light situations. Yep. Kale will do well. They're going to be delayed. So they're not going to produce as quickly as if they're in the sun, in more sunlight. But both will. I've planted both in shadier conditions, and they've done well. Mm-hmm. Yep. Other questions? Nobody else has any other questions? All right. I appreciate you guys coming today. Feel free. I've got some of these plants here to give away. So take one, and if everybody's got one, maybe we can do more. And then I've got seeds, but I don't have a whole lot. I've got probably 15, 20 plants. So come on up. All righty.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.